just have the whole thing.
Okay, I think we're recording. Here we go. Okay, so what I put up in here in bold is just something I want to emphasize before we get started, is really think about these summaries as telling a story. I think because of the nature of how we're trying to do these, a lot of the summaries last week were very kind of disconnected and basic. They were like you took notes and just put capitals and periods. It was like a series of facts, and they didn't really talk about how one paragraph connects to the other paragraph or how one idea, even one sentence, relates to the sentence that comes after it. So what I'm going to really look for in this week's summary is that it tells a story. So make sure your paragraph actually connects to itself. It's not just like this shotgun blast of facts that Mr. Mefford wrote down, or that, you know, whatever that you remember. Make sure it actually connects within each paragraph, and then that you at some point, either in your intro or your conclusion, you're clear, why did we put these three paragraphs together into a single summary? So make sure you tell a story. And if you don't know what the story is, make sure you ask that before we hang up today. Oh, let's let Ziva back in. Okay, so we got three things we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about Workers Unite, which is about Karl Marx. And what's Karl Marx's big idea?
Communism.
Communism, socialism, and communism. So we're talking about that. And then we're talking about Charles Darwin and evolution. Origin of Species is the book, that famous book that he wrote. And then we're going to talk about Albert Einstein and his theory of special relativity. So this is kind of a tricky paper. What do these three guys have in common? Why are we talking about these as part of one story?
They all challenge something that was usually believed in the past years.
Yes, very good. This is all about the changing of ideas, a challenging of the past, and an assertion of new ideas, and kind of an emerging of what we consider modern ideas. And we'll get to this with the so what, but I would say kind of a challenging of Western civilization, challenging of old ideas. And as you'll see, they kind of, some of them have some really destructive consequences. And so they're just three examples of kind of modern thought and the emergence of them: Marx, Darwin, and then Einstein. So I'm saying all that because that's what you want to capture in your summary, is that you actually get the big picture of the story before you start giving some of the specific details. I'd almost rather have more of the big idea and fewer facts in your summaries, to some extent. They call that, you want to see the forest, not just the trees. The last week's summaries were a lot of trees, but I don't think some of you grasped quite how they all fit together. Okay, so let's talk first about Karl Marx. Karl Marx. Workers Unite was kind of, again, the reason that's the title here is because that's the motto of socialism and communism. The idea of workers united to overthrow the capitalists or the owners or the bourgeoisie, for all you bougie people out there. But your first thing you want to talk about is who Karl Marx was. Where was he from? Anybody know where Marx was from? What country?
From Germany.
Yeah, he was German. He was a German historian and writer. His partner, you may remember his partner's name, because he writes this
Friedrich Engels.
Yep, his partner was Friedrich Engels. He was actually a wealthy Englishman who basically paid for Marx to do all his writing. And together they write the Communist Manifesto. The Communist Manifesto, the Handbook of Communism. And that's published in 1848. The Communist Manifesto. And what was he challenging? What was he rejecting?
Religion.
Actually, yes, he would reject religion. We're going to get to that in the second point. But
private properties. And
yeah,
capitalism.
Yeah, capitalism, which includes, someone said, private property. Yeah, so the Communist Manifesto was a response to capitalism and the Industrial Revolution. He wanted to abolish private property. He thought that all history was a battle between the haves and the have-nots. And he saw capitalists and the middle class and owners as being all the haves, and all these poor oppressed workers as the have-nots. What was his fancy name for the middle class, the people who the haves? I'll run write that one. It's the Borgiosi, but we pronounce that how? Anybody know how to say that French word?
Bourgeoisie.
Yeah, the bourgeoisie. Those are the owners. Those are the capitalists. Those are the one, the middle class. Hey, you guys are all bourgeoisie, by the way. And what was his name for the working class?
Oh,
Right?
Oh, right.
The proletariat. The proletariat. And so he saw the purpose. Marx's view was that the whole purpose of history was for this proletariat to overthrow their masters, the bourgeoisie. And he wanted to get rid of private property. He wanted to get rid of owners, and he wanted to establish an equal society where everyone shared. Socialism means everything is owned in common. Communism means everything is owned in common. And so that was his vision of the world, and that was again, he was kind of responding to what the Industrial Revolution. Deeper behind this idea is this idea of materialism. Does anybody know what materialism is?
Yes.
What's materialism? A lot of times we think. Oh, go ahead, Dominic.
Well, I think it's like the belief that all things are results of material, basically.
And
material.
not what? Good. Yeah, and not what? What's the opposite?
God and
Yeah, the supernatural, the spiritual. So socialism is a materialist idea. We all the time think of materialism as like you're obsessed with buying stuff and owning things. And that's part of it. But materialist is what Dominic said. It's the idea that the physical world, the things you can see and touch and hear and taste, those are the only real things. And there is no supernatural world. And what this means is that the other part of this is that human beings, they believed, are not sinful. They thought human beings, because we're just physical meat bags, we are the product of our environment. And that if we just had a better environment, better culture, better homes, better society, there would be no more sin. So it comes from this idea that paradise, we can make paradise here on earth if we can just create the right social circumstances. So that's this idea of getting rid of the bourgeoisie.
wait, did Karl Marx make this up?
His idea was built upon it. I would say it's a general philosophy that human being has existed since the beginning of time. It's just a mindset that only the here and now and the physical matters. And therefore, but yes, Marx definitely, you could attribute this to Marx largely, is this idea that but communism follows this idea that if, again, we can make the world perfect, we just have to restructure it in a certain way. And so part of that, let's get rid of private property. Let's get rid of owners. Let's make everybody hold everything in common. But he also said more radical things like, let's get rid of God. Let's get rid of our culture. He said, we're going to have to get rid of all ideas of truth and redefine everything in order to create the right society that will allow mankind to be perfect and equal. So he called religion the opiate of the masses. He said religion is just another tool of the bourgeoisie to control the workers. And so we've got to get rid of all this stuff and remake society so that we can perfect mankind. So it's very, very radical. And that's going to take us to our third point here is most of the people, when he wrote this in 1848, they thought this guy's nuts. This guy wants to completely reshape Western civilization. That's the other thing. No, Marx is completely challenging everything we've talked about with Western civilization. With maybe the exception of reason. And so people at his time thought he was pretty crazy. But in the 20th century, he became very popular, especially among what group of people? What kind of people?
The dictators.
Dictators, yeah. His philosophy that you are justified in taking complete control of people and their lives for their own good. I'm going to do it for your good. I'm going to do it for the good of my country. I'm going to do it for the good of my society. I might have to kill a few people. I might have to take away your homes, your private property. I might have to deny you your ability to worship your religion, but it's because I actually have a vision for how to make a perfect world. Kind of scary stuff, Hunger Game kind of stuff. And so in this paragraph, you're going to want to explain how that was embraced in the 20th century by various dictators and give examples of those dictators. Who were some of them?
Stalin.
Stalin in the Soviet Union. Yep.
Pol Pot.
Sorry, who else?
Pol Pot.
Yeah, Pol Pot, and that was in
The North Koreans.
Pol Pot in Cambodia. The North Koreans, Kim Jong-un, and now basically Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, and I'm trying to remember the other one. But North Korea, absolutely. You also you want to mention Mao Zedong in China. Mao Zedong in China. Did you guys look up any of those numbers? How many people they killed? To create their perfect societies?
Yep.
Okay, you've got, I think Stalin comes in somewhere around 20 to 40 million people. Mao Zedong, somewhere 40 to like 75 million people. Okay, but again, if all the physical matters, then it doesn't really matter because first of all, there's no judgment in the afterlife. There's no right or wrong. The only thing that's right or wrong is the attempt to kind of remake society. And if you have to kill a few million people to do that, well, that's to the benefit of the ones you didn't kill. It's worth it. This is also kind of feeds into pro-abortion arguments too. And so this idea, while it sounds like paradise, and the idea that we'd all have everything in common and we'd all share and we'd all be equally and nobody would be oppressed, is actually a really terrifying, destructive ideology. And it's forced millions of people to conform. None of these countries, by the way, are successful economically. North Korea's devastation, the Soviet Union collapsed, Cambodia is in poverty, Cuba is in poverty. If you know, Venezuela's in the middle of this. Venezuela, people are starving and eating dogs. It doesn't work. It sounds nice, but it's incredibly deadly, and it destroys all the things that Western civilization values: individuality, freedom, capitalism, religion, all these things. Questions on that story? Anything you want to help clarify or go back to before we move on to Darwin?
What would you say is a description just of materialism, material?
A belief in only the physical world, that only the physical world matters, and so it rejects the supernatural, the spiritual. And a key thing you'd want to include is that it believes man can be perfected if you just provide him the perfect environment. They don't have this, they reject the idea that there's sin in your heart, and that even if you grow up in a wonderful situation, you're still going to potentially be evil. They believe if you had the perfect situation, there'd be no such thing as sin. We're only evil because our society has taught us to be evil.
Got it. All right, thank you.
So that's very unbiblical. This idea is very unbiblical. Socialism. Yeah. Okay, so if you think of something, so origin of species. This is then about another big idea. Marx's idea is economic. Darwin's idea is biological, because we're talking about kind of new modern ideas. Again, you might want to note that in your notes. You got the first paragraph's economics and social kind of. This one's biological. So first we want to talk about Darwin himself for A there. Where was Darwin from?
England?
Yeah, he was from England. Any details about his life?
He studied medicine and
He
Sorry,
dropped out of master.
nature.
Yeah,
he took a 5-year journey to the something beetle.
Yeah, so he went to school. He studied law and religion, but he wasn't very interested in either one. He kind of drops out of that, and he becomes a naturalist, which is kind of what we'd call like a biologist. And so he goes on a 5-year voyage on the HMS Beagle to the Galapagos Islands. Those are a series of islands off the coast of South America, famous for their giant tortoises. And I forget what bird he was looking at right now. So he basically went on a National Geographic exploration voyage, and it's during that voyage that he begins to think about what we'll talk about secondly in a second. He begins to think about the origin of species. Where do all these diverse species come from? He's also personally shaped by, he's really troubled, and this is kind of why he wasn't too into the pastor thing. He's really troubled by the suffering in the world. He's like, why is there, go ahead.
Does his daughter died at age 10?
Yeah, 5. His daughter, I think her name was Anne, dies at age 5. Oh
Really?
no, I'm sorry. No, 10. I'm looking at 5-year voyage. Yeah, you're correct. Yeah, she dies at age 10. Forgive me. And even beyond that, that seemed to just drive the point home to him. But he was always just kind of, again, in his writings, as I read, he's troubled by how could there be a good God if actively, caring about his creation, listening to the prayers of his people when there's still so much suffering. That really bugged him. And so he didn't necessarily say there was no God. I don't think you'd want to say Darwin was an atheist, but he didn't believe that if there was a God, he was very interested in human beings, that he was kind of detached, that he'd made the universe, but then he'd kind of just disappeared and left it to run on its own. So he kind of believed maybe there was an impersonal God that he figured there wasn't much value in studying. He'd rather study the natural world. So secondly, we want to talk about this theory of evolution. What was he trying to answer the question to with evolution? We want to pose the question and then we'll pose his answer.
Is it like how there are so many species, or how?
Yep, that's half of it. 2 things. Yep. How are there so many different kinds of species of organisms, not just animals, but plants too? And why do these animals or organisms seem so perfectly adapted to live in certain environments? When you see certain animals and you see how, whether it's their color, their reproductive abilities, their ability to hunt for food, their ability to climb or move or run through their environment, they look like they were designed. Animals look designed. They look perfectly designed to live in certain circumstances. And there's so many different kinds that the idea that that was an accident, that wasn't God creating each animal that way, that was a really powerful argument for the creation, for there to be a God. So Darwin was looking for a natural explanation for why there's so many species and how they look so perfectly adapted to their environments. And so he comes up with this idea of evolution, gradual changes over time. And what was the mechanism? What did he believe allowed species or organisms to change
Natural
over time?
selection.
Natural selection is the mechanism. Can somebody explain natural selection?
Basically, if a animal has a better trait that can help it survive, then natural selection will help it to be the norm so that all the animals can survive. And over time, they become different animals.
Sure, yeah. It's not that nature, anything's helping the animal. It's just the idea that within a species, there's variations. And some of those animals will have variations that help them survive better. And so the ones that are better adapted to survive, they'll reproduce. So they'll have babies that are more like them and not like the other ones that couldn't survive. And so over time, the ones that are better adapted will be naturally selected through survival to have more babies and be like them. And the ones that were not well adapted will die out. And supposedly over a long period of time, a species can change to look more like the well-adapted version of the species versus the less adaptive one that died out. And this is where we kind of get the idea of survival of the fittest. The ones that are most fit for their environment will survive, and the others ones will die out. So that's what he wrote. Origin of Species, he published in 1859. Was when he published that. And he began to say, so this is how we get both of these things. Animals look perfectly adapted to their environments because they're the ones that survived and had babies. The ones that weren't specialized, they all died out. And sometimes they became so specialized that they turned into, they became a new species altogether. And another key thing that allows species to be different amongst themselves is mutations, natural selection and mutation. People are born, their genes mutate, and so that's what provides these potential differences. And then the ones that are most successful become normal, and the ones that were not successful, well, they just die out because they don't live long enough to have a lot of babies or reproduce. Okay, so then we talk. So we want to so that was his idea. And how does this create social change? Why is this idea so radical?
Oh, because it disproved God actually creating the animals.
Yeah, and I think the important nuance thing here is that One, it makes biology a really powerful field of study because now we have a natural explanation. It's like when Newton did it with gravity. Now all of a sudden, a lot of people are going to study that because they have a natural way to explore it. This is now, the evolution is now going to provide the same thing for biology. But also, it did give people who did not want to accept God as the creator of the universe, it gave them a scientific, valid reason to believe what they wanted to believe. I don't think you want to say Darwin wasn't out to disprove God's existence or anything like that. But it now kind of basically gave people who didn't want to believe in God, it gave them justification to say, yeah, of course, no, you don't have to say God created everything. I've got a scientific theory for how it happened without God. And so it kind of popularizes atheism. It kind of sows doubt in the Bible, because this is where you kind of begin to get more and more of this argument. Evolution, for these changes to happen over time through mutation and natural selection, this is going to take millions and billions of years to happen. And a lot of people saw that as a challenge to how they read the Genesis account, that, you know, the earth is only a couple thousand years old versus billions of years old. And so people began to kind of wonder, well, is the Bible really even true? And so people began to kind of question the Bible, and they also began to question, this is also, notice this is another materialist argument, which is what science should be. Science should be materialist when we study the physical world, but notice it's saying only the physical things matter. And so when people think of evolution, they think, well, we can explain everything without the supernatural. We can explain everything without God, so why even bother? So it kind of creates this excuse to ignore God and ignore the supernatural.
But you wouldn't say like Charles Darwin did that on purpose?
I wouldn't. I don't know him personally enough, and what I've read, I think we can demonize him as a person and think like he was out to just do this. No, I think it's just the effects of the idea. And I think people who already had that attitude in their heart use it as an excuse. And there were people who didn't have that in their heart, and they said, well, this doesn't disprove God, it just changes, you know, kind of how we look at the universe and maybe how we read Genesis. So I wouldn't say that was a personal intent of his idea. The other thing that you want to put in this is social Darwinism, which again is going to be important. It's not something he comes up with, but how people use his ideas. Does anybody know what social Darwinism is?
Isn't it? But
It's basically taking this idea of survival of the fittest and applying it to human society. So that as we see organisms struggle and fight and only the best adapted survive, they think, well, that's how human beings should live. That human beings should basically be survival of the fittest. And so what that encourages is intense competition between human beings. And basically, you know what? We have a disagreement. Well, let's fight it out and we'll see who's better adapted. And that's idea of greater conflict. And when we get into World War I, that's going to be a major idea of, you know what, let's see whose nation, let's see whose race, let's see whose ethnicity is better adapted to survive. And the idea of exterminating inferior races, all of that is part of social Darwinism. So is the idea of inferior and superior races. So again, it's a very kind of feeds into racism. And also the idea of like, we need to execute mentally disabled people, or we need to abort people who are going to be physically handicapped, because they're like these sad, poorly adapted organisms that aren't going to survive anyway. So we need to make sure that those people don't exist. Again, that was not Darwin's intent, but again, it was just one of the ways in which this idea was taken. It kind of seemed like a scientific justification for racism, and also just to, you know, basically settle disagreements with physical competition, fighting, conflict. We'll see which lion is stronger. Okay. Questions on Darwin or evolution? You can decide, depending on what you're writing. The only thing we haven't talked about is there are, you know, there's problems with Darwin's theory. And there's scientific reasons why we think he can explain why different species vary, how species do adapt to their environments, and they change fur color, they change size, they change speed, they change eating habits depending on where they live. And you can see why, and just to consider dogs. Dogs are a species, but they're extremely varied depending on the circumstances of their breeding. But where they think he got it wrong, and this is even growing into more and more colleges, is that it does not explain new species. His whole idea that you can create whole new species just through genetic mutations and natural selection, that does not seem like a scientifically viable idea. And that video that you're supposed to watch for your homework this week kind of goes over 2 reasons why. But you don't necessarily have to get into that in this summary. We're more looking at the historical impact of his idea. Okay, we ready for Einstein then? We'll keep going. Okay, Einstein. Where was Einstein from?
Germany.
Germany. And so just to be clear, notice the title of this summary is Einstein's Theory of Relativity. That's just because he's the latest in time, and we're kind of building up to it. So Einstein is just representing one of these 3 major kind of culture world-changing ideas that we're talking about. But yeah, he was from Germany. He struggled in school, but Joe, thanks for the research a little bit. Didn't necessarily, he wasn't like he got poor grades or was a terrible student or wasn't good at math or anything. He was just mainly bored and didn't like the structure of school. He didn't like having to study for grades and do homework and stuff like that. He was a little more of a free thinker. What subject captures his interest?
Geometry.
Geometry. He begins to go, well, now that's interesting. And he just studied it on his own. Hallelujah. And in fact, he gets a job as a patent clerk. He just basically an office job where he can see people applying for patents for new inventions. And it's while those patents are coming in, he would study the patents because they were kind of interesting, but he also just did his own studying on his own. And it's while just working at an office job that he has his first major breakthroughs, which he actually proves that atoms exist. This is a whole idea of quantum theory. Sounds really fancy and advanced, but basically all quantum theory was that he asserted that atoms exist and that all matter was made up of these tiny microscopic particles called atoms. That was his first idea. He also does experiments with light. Why does he have to leave Germany?
Because of the Nazis. Nazi party, right?
He starts to face persecution and a restriction in his studies in Germany during the 1930s as the Nazis rise to power, and so he flees and he moves to the United States later on. But he does a lot of his research before that there in Europe. So the main theory though that we're going to look at is this idea of special relativity. And anybody want to tell me anything about that? Because I know it could be a little complicated. And that's 1905. 1905, he publishes his special relativity idea. And so that's our date for this summary. 1905.
Or that time is subject to matter or something like that.
Say that
Or is
again.
it variable?
Say it again, Wyatt.
That time is variable or something like that.
Yeah, so the main idea, if you're confused, is that time is not constant. We think of time as a fixed thing that does not change. And he asserts, no, time is relative. That's where we get the relativity from. Time is relative and that it's experienced differently depending on different variations. And just to skip ahead to the big idea here is all of these ideas are about shaking previously believed things. You know, Marx is challenging that, you know, the whole society and the relationship between classes needs to change, and we need to usher in this economic utopia. Darwin is saying, no, your whole idea of how the earth was created is wrong. It was a natural process, and it was through, you know, natural selection and evolution, not over thousands of years, but over billions of years. And then Einstein shows up in 1905 and says, hey, guess what? Even your experience of time is relative. And so people are just having their minds blown from the 1850s into the 1900s in the 20th century, and everything they thought was settled and constant is kind of being challenged. And the very basic idea is that the way that time is relative is depending on your motion, that how you're moving changes your experience of time. And we typically can't go fast enough to appreciate this, but that if we can, things that go fast approaching the speed of light actually experience time differently. And time kind of, from our perspective, slows down for those things that are moving really, really fast. and that if you were to be able to travel at near the speed of light for any duration of time, you would experience time more slowly, and hence you'd actually be younger than people who were living for that same amount of time but at a slower velocity or a slower speed. So if you've ever seen the movie Interstellar, it kind of plays with this idea. I don't know if anybody's seen that movie, Interstellar. But anyway, the other, so again, he's really kind of challenging things that we thought Newton had settled the idea of physics, and he kind of revolutionized everything with his universal law of gravitation. Einstein challenges that, and he actually says Newton got some things wrong, and to a large degree he's right, that it's the gravity and space and everything is more complicated than even Newton understood, especially when you bring in ideas of things at the atomic level, tiny little atoms, and things at the huge level of being able to travel at like the speed of light. And so kind of like where Newton's idea suddenly made the universe seem more like it made sense, like, hey, we get this. Hey, this is a machine we can understand. We can do this. Einstein kind of made people feel like, oh my gosh, we have no idea what's going on. Everything is so mysterious. Everything is so uncertain. I don't know what to believe in anymore. You know, it was exciting because we were breakthroughs, but a lot of people, it kind of just represents this challenge of, you know what, we don't anything we were confident about, we shouldn't be so confident in anymore, because it's all potentially relative. And, you know, maybe capitalism and maybe individual property isn't the right way to go. Maybe we need to form this, maybe communism really is the best way to go. And maybe there is no God. There's simply we're just animals, and we really are just survival of the fittest. And we should, you know, not allow certain races to reproduce. And maybe we should acknowledge there is no God. There's only the physical world. Again, all of this is this growing unease and change in how people see themselves and how they see the world. All right, so and that's the so what. That's what we're getting into, the so what. And again, just as a heads up, you want to explain your so whats. You know, highest you can probably get is a B+ if you don't put some effort into your so whats. But the two reasons as this matters is what I've kind of said over and over again, how these ideas are challenging the past. I would also include Western civilization in that. Einstein, not so much. I don't think Einstein's ideas challenged Western civilization. They were pretty objectively scientific. Not that he was all right, but and Darwin didn't directly challenge it either, but it was used by people who wanted to challenge it with the idea of social Darwinism. Again, Western civilization is all about equality in the eyes of God. Now Darwin says, well, maybe some people aren't more equal. Maybe the ones who are stronger should be the ones who should be in charge, because the weak aren't as well adapted to create good societies. That's not an idea of Western civilization. And obviously, Marx is very anti-civilization with what he wants to do. And they all are undergirded by this idea, not that they intended it, but this idea of we don't need God anymore. And I kind of look at this phase in Western civilization as almost like the teenage phase, where like they and maybe even young adult, they now feel they've been so blessed and they've become so prosperous and so powerful in terms of everything that they've learned and can do, that now they're like, we don't need God anymore. You know, it all started with reading the Bible. It all started with biblical ideas, but now look at what you've achieved, and you've got a real issue of pride. Got a real issue of kind of a cultural pride that says, you know what, we can do it. We can, by our own reason, our own intelligence, we can remake this world, and we can make heaven here on earth. We don't need some Jesus to take us to heaven later. We can make heaven on earth here with the power of our own minds and our own ideas. And that's materialism. We can do it here in the material world. We don't need to, it'd be kind of like, you know, we have COVID-19 right now. They think, you know, it's the idea of you're wasting your time if you're praying for some solution to this COVID-19. If you're asking God to help us deal with this crisis, you should be doing something practical and actual doable. You should be out trying to find a vaccine. You should actually be trying to give the government more power so the government can come in and make sure we have enough money and medicine to survive this. So that's kind of the battle that is emerging from these three ideas. Are we as a civilization going to rely on God and his wisdom, and that there is a supernatural wisdom higher than ours? Or are we going to believe that we have everything here in the material world and it's up to us to figure everything out? Oops, go back to that. What was that? That was, sorry if it was that bad. That is what the world is going to feel like, that sad noise there, because our next topic is World War One.
Oh.
It's not going to be pretty. Okay. Any questions? Don't want to keep you too long, but take a few more minutes. Anybody want clarification on anything?
Did you say that you don't think Einstein really past ideas?
I'm sorry?
Did you say that Einstein didn't challenge like past ideas like how, or that he mainly did?
Who? I missed the name of who's doing that. Who are you talking
Einstein.
about? Yeah, well, like I said, with Einstein, I'm talking about more of what the effect that his ideas had on people, not that he was like anti-Western civilization or anything.
Okay.
You know, I would say he was pretty pro. He was pretty pro Western civilization. But again, the effect of his idea was just to create this atmosphere of kind of uncertainty. You know, the things we were so confident in, something like time itself. Now, I don't even know if I can believe in that. He's also going to come up with the famous equation E equals mc squared, which is going to be the foundation for the atomic bomb. That's going to be pretty earth-shattering. Okay, anything else? Just looking ahead, next week you only have 4 days. So this meeting to do next week's summary will actually be on Thursday, because it's Good Friday. This coming Sunday's Palm Sunday, Friday's Good Friday, and then Easter's the following Sunday. I'll set up an appointment for next Thursday for our next topic, and that'll be the last one before we take a break for Easter.
Got it.
All right, guys. It's nice to see you guys. Miss you.
Bye.
Joe, Jack, Justin, Jasmine. What's up, Micah? Hope you
Bye.
won
Thank
some video
you.
games while we were talking.
Uh,
All right.
Bye.
Nellie, tell your brother if he wants help with geometry to call me on this thing on Zoom. As I'll tutor him. It'll be good. All right, Elijah. See ya. See ya, Dominic. Bye, Haley. Bye, Abby. What's your dog's name, Abby?
Chloe.
Chloe. All right. Bye, Chloe. Bye, Sam.
Bye.
Allow us to hear your beautiful voice next time, Sam. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.